Well, number one, I want to thank you for having me here. It is a subject in this town that comes up in weird and mysterious ways. And it's a complex story. It's not a straight line. It's religion is in general is very controversial. People are passionate about it, and it's about communities. And so this is where I had John to be my sounding board. I didn't want to bore you, or I didn't want to insult you, but most important, I wanted to tell a story that really talks about how important religion is to this community and always has been, and also a bit controversial. So the reason why I have this one picture up is Ernie Marcus just passed away at age 99 and 10 months. And he was my hero. He was a part of the land grant family. His family has been here since the 1830s and was part of the original Spanish land grant. And his life was to bring the history of his family and the rancho, and also his Catholicism. He was enormously dedicated to the church. His family, in fact, was the staff of the church. Lois, his wife, was the cardinal's secretary, and his two daughters work for the Los Angeles, thank you. Thank God I have a cue. But I wanted to dedicate it to him, and I'm sort of doing the speech in his memory. By the way, his service was at St. Monica's, and Cardinal Mahoney did it with all the staff. There were like 4 bishops there. It was unbelievable, very moving service, and next to him is Angie and Rosemary Miano. So we will start our process here, and as I say, he was quite a man. In fact, this is at his family graveyard that's on San Lorenzo. And it's a beautiful corner. He built all the crosses. He's an artist, and each cross of people he had tracked down were there. And it's a huge work of art. So Ernie, we'll get this started. And by the way, Sharon Kilbride is above him. Okay. Now, I'm going to start with the Native Americans. It was the Tongvan tribe were in this area. In fact, the Indian presence in the area was 5,000 years. They came very early on to this area, and their archaeological sites, they're quite extraordinary. And so the Tongvan tribes were Shoshonean, that was their language. And their religion was animist, meaning they kind of, every rock, every stream, every fish, everything was sacred to them. And they were very respectful to the land. The Tongvan tribes were not aggressive, they weren't warlike. And because part of it is, as California has such a mellow seasons and weather, that they can actually track through when they do the excavations of where they are buried. There are very few that died of wounds. So it was a blissful place to be. Now this was a trove of artifacts that were found in Santa Monica Canyon, right up that overlooked the ocean. And it just, an archaeologist came across it kind of by happenstance. And what these stones are, there are these are called pelican stones. And you can see where there is a, where they have canoes and figurines. And they really were very attached to the beauty of the mountains. There are quite a few sites there. Topanga has one of the oldest sites, very, very long standing. And they had, sacred, this was called a Yuma figurine, and this is a very sacred object to them. And so I'll start kind of with the Native Americans, and but what was coming from Europe. By the way, this was the woman whose property the archaeologists tripped over these things. Her name is Mrs. Frote, and I'll show you the exact location of where these objects were found. The kind of next group to come was the conquistadors. What we have here is an artist's rendering of Father Crespi. Was the first one to come and record. He was sent as an advance party with the Portola expedition. And Sarah was actually his boss, but he was injured and stayed in San Diego. So Crespi has his journal is extraordinary because what it is he's introducing himself to a land where they have only seen, that Native Americans had only seen ships passing by. And so they hadn't met Europeans. And so he described in tremendous detail, he put it, the heathens, and you kind of, but this is how, when you're coming into a foreign land, how do you deal with it? And see, this was really about the fourth step of the conquest. And all of how to deal with it had been worked out before by Father Kino. And he was a Jesuit who actually settled the lower part of Baja California. And it was an extraordinary accomplishment. Father Kino really had a way of making the Native Americans he taught them how to do agriculture. And he actually had an incredible way with bringing European culture to Native Americans. And what happens, though, is there was a big schism in the church where the Jesuits were becoming so successful and so powerful, they were removed forcibly from Baja and from their other, and it's because they were so successful that the viceroys who were running the land were jealous. And so this was something that created problems. Father Serra kind of stepped into this kind of void and was the one who came up into California. And so this is something that created kind of a schism. Instead of the natives kind of working in partnership, it became a little adversarial. But Sarah actually worked very hard to make this work. Okay? And here in California, there were very few people. A lot of the population had already been impacted by disease. A lot of the native population had already died. And so it was kind of a slow motion tragedy. After a while, Sarah really had to kind of talk to the viceroy and say, look, we have to do something about this. This is getting to be kind of a bad situation. And so what happens is that Father Sarah figured out that he had to go back to Mexico City and ask the authorities that their laws be made to protect the Native Americans. And so he tried very hard, and they actually were passed. But he always had trouble with the temporal authorities. This is a very early shot of San Gabriel Mission. As you can see, there's nothing. Nothing was around it. And must have been quite extraordinary. Also, disease was rampant amongst, for example, they'd bring shipping in, and almost the crews would be wiped out with scurvy. This was a tough period of time and very difficult. And really the population of this area right here was pretty much decimated. And it wasn't until the ranchos really started to get started around 1820, 1830, that the population started to rise again. You have to understand that when, by the 1820s, 1830s, there were only 2,500. They've kind of done Europeans in all of California. This was a very sparsely populated area. This is Portola, and as I say, he was kind of a little heavy-handed on how he administered. In fact, this is where you can see that the natives had to be kind of protected, and they had to have, they'd give them sanctuary, meaning the mission would give the Native Americans sanctuary. Well, many times the temporal authorities would break that and would arrest the Indians. So this became a major issue. But it really kind of culminated with Sarah putting his foot down, and he actually did have a good effect. This is a picture of one of the last Tongvans. There are Tongvans left, but this is one of full blood. His name was Rocha. And I love this picture. He is quite extraordinary. This is the bottom of Santa Monica Canyon. This is 1877. And this was about 30 years after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which happened in 1848. And so this is when the United States took over authority over a massive area that used to belong to Mexico. That was, it covered an area that went from like Colorado to Nevada to California. And you have to understand that the reason why the Spanish authorities and the Mexican authorities came up into California was to keep the Russians from taking over the state. Now you have the Americans coming in. Fremont came in with his troops. There was battles were going on. And so with a little money and some negotiating, the United States got all of that territory in one fell swoop in 1848. So this then started another kind of regime. Now, during the time of the Spanish and Mexican, the only way you could live in California or New Mexico was if you converted to Catholicism. It was a requirement. And there were many people from the United States who did come out, but they were appreciated, but they had to convert to Catholicism. After the Treaty of Hidalgo, that was done away with. The American law of religion reigned supreme. And by the way, the law of the land became the First Amendment. The religious freedom is the First Amendment. It's the freedom of speech. And so all religions from 1848 on were considered equal in the state of California. So this here, by the way, in this picture, there are you can just barely see cattle, but the area where those artifacts were found were on that plateau right up there. And it's an extraordinary sight to see the land with not one single house on it. Okay. And the land grant, though, if you had a land grant, you were allowed to keep your land. You had to prove your boundaries. That was the big difficulty. The Marquez family had 2,000 acres. Their land grant went from Adelaide all the way to Topanga. It's about 3,000 acres. And so it was the Marqueses and Reyeses who held the land, and they did prove to the new administrators so they held on to their grant. And then Santa Monica Canyon started to get more and more structures. It became we were a place where people would get away from the city of Los Angeles, and they'd take a wagon out. It'd take about a day, and they built these are the Marqueses built bathhouses, and then of course the bar and pavilion over there in the corner, that was a bar, so alcohol was very important. And so you can see, but notice how the ocean goes right up against the bluffs. And you can sort of see trees on top of the hill at the very top. Those are early eucalyptus trees that are in Huntington Palisades. They were brought in by Abbott Kinney. I know, a voice that will become very important to Venice.
Andy?
Yes?
Is that Chautauqua Channel?
Okay, what this is just a stream. They had no roads.
What would it be today?
Okay, this would be right here is Channel Road, and this is Entrada right here. Entrada right here. Chautauqua goes up here. And it's only a cattle trail at that time. This picture is about 1888. What's amazing is this is a wonderful parade float that the Marquez kids put together. And it's a carreta. To show how empty this environment was if you were going by carreta from one rancho to another, which were usually 2 or 3 miles if they were close together, they could hear the carreta 3 miles away. There was no other sounds. No other sounds. This is the Marquez Cemetery. It's on San Lorenzo. I don't know if any of you visited. If there's a special event there, do visit. It's an extraordinary place. By the way, where the big cross is was the original adobe for the founder of the Marquez family land grant. Ernie Marcus will be buried here at the cemetery, and which makes me feel very, very happy. The road coming down is the 7th Street Hill. It's in Entrada. It really, and what happens is the family had scientists come in and use ground penetrating radar, find out where all the graves. There was only 3 markers left in place, and they found 30 people. Many of the Native Americans who worked on the rancho are buried in this cemetery. I love this picture. Yeah. It just, they would put together tremendous picnics, and they all talked about how they would do these pit barbecues, and they were embracing to all the neighbors. And what was starting to come up now is that there were huge developments on the horizon. One of them was the mile-long wharf. What's interesting about this is that the group of people coming into Pacific Palisades now, it's a polyglot. It was European, Chinese, Japanese, people from India, and they came in on the vessels. Collis Huntington wanted to make the Palisades the port of Los Angeles. We could have been San Pedro, as I keep on that. Sorry. but what the very first religious structure built in the Palisades, you'll see a white door on a building up there. That's a Buddhist temple. So the very first structure was Buddhist, which I think is kind of amazing. And you can see, these are the stevedores that worked on the wharf. And so you can see, it was a mix of people, and this is where you get this wonderful, deep history of amazing people who had moved here. And this was considered this amazing wonderland of mountains and ocean and boundless fishing, and where you would go on these lumber schooners, where that would bring lumber down from Northern California. And another group started to come in about 1921 that was wanting to build their dream place, and it was the Methodists. They were wanting to build, the Methodists had built in all across the country chautauqua centers, education, entertainment. It was considered a very important, very American kind of process of education. People wanted to hear opera singers. They wanted to, hear lectures. And so they dreamed of having one in Pacific Palisades on the West Coast. They purchased the land, and what they did is they laid it out. They got an architect to do the layout. This road right here is Via de la Paz. And if you notice, it goes up to a giant, very fancy temple type thing. It was a monument to peace. The reason why is because everybody had just gone through World War I. They were tired of war. They wanted to have something looking toward the future. These plans were put together by several architects, one of them being the Olmsted brothers, who laid out Central Park. They wanted to have, if you notice, except for one structure here, which would be in their landslide zone, run. If you notice, the commercial district is inland. They did that on purpose. They wanted this to be about life, about being not making money. They felt it was important to have the community kind of interact with the ocean and in a way that wasn't carnival-like. They'd seen how Venice and things like that had been so commercialized that they didn't want that. So this is why you have a lot of residential kind of worked right up to the edge, and a lot of parks along the edge of the canyons. And so this was their dream. And you could see there were so many people who had been through World War I in the Palisades and in Santa Monica Canyon. This is one of them who, you know, they wanted to have a community that really had to do with just doing groovy things. So these are the founders. There are two Methodist bishops there, and this gentleman right here is named Dr. Scott. He was the brains behind this. If you notice, there ain't nothing there. And this was their first brochure. Pacific Palisades, the Christian community of homes, the Christian education center, the Christian pleasure resort. I don't know what that means. Founded by Methodism for the benefit of all Christians. Keep that in mind. Lofty mountains, wooded canyons, and ocean beach. You should secure a home in this Christian environment. Pacific Palisades Association. So you can see they had a theme going here. This is Dr. Scott. And he was a real scholar and very liberal, very open-minded. The speakers that they would have at the Chautauqua would be scientists who would talk about glaciation and that the world was older than 6,000 years ago. They would have opera singers like Madame Schumann-Heink. Every kid, everybody who moved into town was made a part of the orchestra. They had to perform, you know? And so it was this amazing, it was, you know, Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney puts on an MGM production. These do look like pretty surly people, though. This is founding day under Founder's Oak, which is right over here, right over there at Haverford. And so this is a day where they drew for lots. You could not own your property at that time. You had a leasehold. And part of that was so that they could protect how the community would be developed. They did not want alcohol. They took, well, that's that part about having fun. I have no idea how they did that. Also, they put on huge events. This is, you're looking down Via de La Paz from about Rimmer. This is Easter sunrise service, 1922. And you could see all the cars and the huge number of people. Downtown Pacific Palisades is that, see where there's that little canyon that comes up? Where there's a big bump in Sunset. That's the reason there's a big bump in Sunset. They filled that canyon without compacting it. But this was where the lots were being laid out, and they were going to, and the first thing they did on that hill is put a cross on it. There it is. You can see the cross to the upper left, and this, they'd bring a piano to the top, they'd put on a whole shindig, and with lilies all over the place. And they'd march down into the canyon, and they had, in the canyon, they had giant amphitheaters, and people would come from all over the world to this. It was a big deal. And the Women's Christian Temperance Union was being sure there wasn't no liquor there. As I say, I'm not sure I would have liked this place. But next door were the uplifters, who were polar opposite. Their god was liquor. Now they were in Rustic Canyon, right next. But oh, by the way, these are all guys in drag, if you were wondering. And well, they put on plays and productions, but not kind of those Christian types. This was a Christian type. As I said, everybody was fodder for being in the cast. This was the tabernacle. It could hold 2,000 people. It was all made of wood, and it had a radio antenna on top. Remember, this is about 24, 25. Radio was brand new. This was state of the art. And they put on huge productions. This is one of the outdoor amphitheaters. And they'd also put in classes. They would teach, how everything from how to have the perfect household, how to, keep cooking, all the way to, how to run a church. It was, and the summer camp would have up to 5,000 people. And that was all based around Temescal Canyon. You can still say some of the old buildings are still there. This was the what it was called the President's Council. This was the group who controlled the town. If you notice, more women than men. This town was actually run by women and very powerful. The gentleman to the upper right back is Gabrielson. His name is John Gabrielson. And he was one of the ministers of the Methodist Church. Now, they also started, if you notice, the names in the Palisades all have religious meaning. They're either a Christian university or a major minister or somebody. Almost all the streets are named after significant Christian something. So, one of the streets is called Kagawa. This is where I'm going to say there's a little dark edge to this silver lining. Kagawa was a very important minister in Japan who helped make trade unions during 1920 to 1930, late 30s. This was not really very well liked by the militarism of Japan. He was in jail a lot, let's just say that. But he was somebody who wanted to work for workers' rights, very highly regarded, wrote wonderful books. And so they named a street after him. Well, you could name, he in fact visited in 1953 his street, but somebody wryly said, he can visit it, but he can't live on it. There were restrictive covenants on the whole Palisades. You couldn't be black and you couldn't be Oriental. And so this is something that was really, you could see that you're beginning to see there are margins to this Christian bliss. Also, they wanted to embrace what a very narrow group of people. Let's just say that. Also, they did name a street after, now everybody says, well, that's Spanish for the house. This is Bartolomé Las Casas. And he was known for, during when Christopher Columbus came on his second voyage, he was the priest who came along. And his thing was the protection of Native Americans. He was horrified by how they were being treated. And so this street is named after a man who protected Indians. And that was in the 16th century. And he was actually put in jail by the Vatican, but they actually came around to his thinking. And he was very important with codifying in the church Native American rights. Very important. There was also clubs, religious clubs. This is called the Wee Boys. See the little lady? That's Eva Birch. She was a Sunday school teacher who was so popular that her students kind of adopted her. And what they did is they put together a men's club called the Wee Boys, and they brought a building over so that was their clubhouse. And it's on Haverford. It's now where Seven Arrows is now. And this building was being torn down in the Wilshire district. So they moved in 1927 in two halves this structure from downtown LA to build their clubhouse. So the community was this sort of weird hodgepodge of these associations. YMCA had a thing that, and so it was kind of a dynamic place. Now it was time for them to build their permanent church, the Methodists. So this is the cornerstone lane of the church that is on Via de la Paz. So they built this structure right here. What's interesting about it is they called this part of the building right here, it's called the community church. It's where any Christian denomination could use that for their services. They really kind of wanted to have everybody be under their roof. So there was an uncomfortableness, let's just say. So what happens is, this is Gabrielson again, and he's putting another addition on that. By the way, this was done in the 1940s. Those are lamb beams, one of the earliest use of laminated beams. The building is really quite extraordinary in that area. Okay, so this is what we see. Now, there's a kind of an everybody in town. There are a lot of non-Methodists who moved into the town, and so during the Depression, the Methodists had lost the ability to hold on to the property. They had overextended themselves. So people were buying their own houses, and they weren't necessarily Methodists. And so there was a movement away from the Methodist Church. The first ones to bolt were the Episcopalians. This is the original St. Matthew's. And it was not where it is now. This, if you know, I want you to notice the roof lines. Okay. This was a redwood structure, and it had a prayer garden, and where it was right where the interchange building for GTE on the corner of La Cruz and Swarthmore. And I'll show it to you. That is where the St. Matthews had gone to. Well, what they did is almost immediately they got the place they wanted, which is on Bienvenida, and there it is. What they did is they moved their church. They just moved the whole thing and plopped it down. You can see the roof line right here. You can see where the shingles change colors. They didn't even change shingles. They did. And they had a well-known architect put a kind of a facade on it, and they called it, hey, new place. And so they moved in 1945 to this location. And that was the interior of it. I remember this as a child. I am Episcopalian. And so I was baptized at that cross. It burned in the 1978 fire. Now, there were other groups that were still using the community room, but they're all aiming for their own place. This is a Catholic Mass. This is Cotter. I'm not sure if this is in, but this is where I'm going to sell. You have to make your history. The Catholic Church here has an amazingly deep history. And there are people who may have been a kid here. And it's important to get these histories down. It gives a real depth to the community that you have. And so I think this is in the community room, and that it's a mass that happened there. And so now what happened is there was a gentleman who bought a big hunk of land. His name is Leland Ford. He was a congressman. And he bought a huge hunk of property. And this became, this was this, okay, you'll see how this is all parceled out. They're breaking ground for the Bay Theater. In fact, the architect is Robert Wilson in the upper right in that weird suit. The other part that was on his property is this. This is the church. And this picture is about 1953. And what was interesting is the local newspaper didn't cover Catholic events. It's because it's a Methodist newspaper. So, you kind of go, wait a minute, that appeared. And so, but the newspaper was changing, and the Browns were Catholic. After 1954, you're covered like crazy. And we got their collection. When I say we, the Historical Society, many of them are plainclothes people right in amidst you, so watch out. And we got the negatives from the old Palisadian, no, this is the Post, Palisades Post. And the Post covered the Catholic Church. And they had the most beautiful images you've ever seen. These are all taken with those big press cameras, 4x5 negatives. You can see every stitch. I mean, these are legendary photos. So the next few photos you see are from this set, okay? And these are about 1954-55. I believe this is the consecration of the church. And I know he must be really famous. I'm saying you got to take this picture to somebody in the church and they can tell you because he looks awesome. Also, you can see the Bay. You can see the Bay Theater over there. The car wash is not in yet, and you can see it's just opened. By the way, I would behave if I were you. See, they're behaving. And so we went from no pictures to, I got to tell you, every movement. I don't know who this is, but every movement she made was photographed. And that's Cotter on the right. Isn't that a great shot? That's right there. And to me, when you see these pictures and you see how how exciting it must have been for people of Catholic faith in this town to have this being built. I love this picture. Isn't that cool? And so the building went on, and so Mr. Hughes, who now backs up to you, is this gentleman right here. And this is Leland Ford, and they're breaking ground for Hughes Market. And by the way, everything was changing in this town. The Methodists must have really felt real anguish because all their land was being sold that was going to be a dream where they were going to have their great facilities. Remember, this is the cross on Peace Hill. Was knocked over by a bulldozer for a housing subdivision. The one who was the developer was a Presbyterian minister by the name of Rimmer. So blame it on the Presbyterian minister. By the way, this cross was rescued and put on the top of the tower. The Methodists they dragged the cross down the street and they put it up there, which I think is cool. But even in the Methodist Church, they were having a kind of a revolution happening within their congregation. There was a Christian church that was being called the Christian Church, and it was a group within the Methodists who didn't like that they thought there were things that were happening that they didn't believe, and so they marched out ceremonially and said, we're going to build our own church. This was on Via de la Paz also, just down the road, but I want to show you what made them flee. Dancing in River City. So it was literally, there's too much singing, too much dancing. And it's the darndest thing. So the kids love to dance. So, but another group was coming in also. And this is the self-realization and fellowship. But originally, you notice they have kind of an odd series of structures. Well, what it was there was a set designer by the name of McElroy. And he had all these sets he was building for 20th Century Fox. And he said, I'll just put them over here on my piece of property. He built kind of a whole thing around the little, by the way, it's not a natural lake. It happened when they graded for sunset. And so you can see there's a Chinese junk. There's the windmill. Over here is a houseboat. And here's a bit of India. And so what happens is he just sort of brought all these sets, and then he sort of got bored with it, and he said, well, I have an urge to give it away. Now, mind you, as a historian, and I tell you at the very beginning here, this is the beginning of a process. It's where when you're a historian, what you do is you hear a story and you don't necessarily give it much credence, but it's a good story, so listen away. What it was, the story goes, that he wanted to give it away to a religion. So he opened up the phone book, and it said, there was a heading which said, a religion of all religions. And he goes, I'll give it to them. Well, Maharishi Yogananda was looking for a place just at that very moment. And so how lucky was he to get a place for free? I'm not sure that's really the story. But let's just say Maharishi Yogananda of the Self-Realization Fellowship had the neatest place to set up his ashram. And so that happened about 1949. So all of this is happening in the late 40s. And so what it is they built this center here, and the ashes of Gandhi, are in, well, at the same time, the Bernheimer Gardens was falling into Pacific Coast Highway. So all the objects that were there, they just moved over here. So they had urns and things like that. So there went the Gandhi ashes. And so, by the way, the houseboat to the far right was used in a movie and came from Sacramento. That's where the Maharishi lived, in the houseboat. And by the way, they feel that they honor Hindu, Buddhism, Christianity, Muslim. They always feel that they're all interrelated in belief. And that's was that felt that every religion had something to say, and this is the place where they say it. And boy, I tell you, when they have an event, they get the poke. Okay, this then you had this is, for example, the Lutherans. They broke away. They made their own. And then the Presbyterians. This was the original Presbyterian church. It was the sales office that's at Sunset and El Medio. There was a sales office for the association. It was torn down, and that was built. And that was torn down about 8 years ago, 9 years ago, and there's a more modern structure. I think this is a gorgeous looking structure. But they're also up Temescal Canyon. They built a church, and that was the Presbyterians also. And so this was the church, and it's still there. It's called Stewart Hall. Also, my mom was a Christian Scientist. So the Christian Science reading room kind of wandered around town here and there. And but they had a church on Bester. The Jewish temple was built about 1958-59. There was a lot of pushback. The neighborhood tried to fight it, but the other half of the neighborhood fought for it. Meaning this was considered very important that the community have all religions covered and have their own facilities. Well, there's an answer on this one. This was the old fire station. It's actually where the empty parking lot is, where the giant sinkhole is opening up. Now, why are you having this photograph, Randy? Well, that's because the fire station was moved in the early 70s, And the Mormon church moved in here while they were building their church. So this was the Mormon church for a while, and this is the Mormon church now. So this was the last church built. I don't know of any others. So I'm going to end with what my favorite thing of religion to me was always Christmas. And I always look forward to the community's Christmas displays. And I'm going to end here with Ernie Marcus ending. This is what the graveyard looks like. That is San Lorenzo to the right. And I appreciate you, and I will take questions. But more important, I'm telling you folk that whatever church you belong to, put together your history. It's super important. And it really celebrates your group. So any questions? Any questions? Did I answer them all? Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, yes. Monsignor.
Tell the story about.
I don't have a question. First
Yeah.
of all, I want to thank you for some of the subtleties that you made part of your presentation, which are really important. In the beginning when you were talking about Sarah so respectfully, thank you for pointing out the little subtle things between the Jesuits and the Franciscans and so on like that. And obviously all of those things lead to a deeper European history. And what was going on in Europe was affecting what was going on right here. And the native people didn't know that, but the bottom line was the struggles of Europe came with the conquistadores to here.
Yes.
They brought their struggles with them and their battles and everything else. So thank you for touching on some of those subtleties, right?
What I had to do, it was a great process because I've always loved Kino. The very big fan of how the Jesuits handled it. And what helped me, and it talked about it in this book, it's called Indian Survival on the California Frontier. And it talks about all the different groups and exactly what you're talking about, the cross currents. And so I want you to understand, I was really careful.
You did a great job. Thank you for even touching on that. All right?
I wasn't going to, but I thought that it wouldn't help. And also, I found that the Catholic Church was trying very hard. It's hard to come into a foreign land. It's not easy. And so I thank you.
Sure. And the other comment that would be, here we are in 2024, and we're looking at a lot of dates that go back a long way in what you're sharing. And I want you all to know that in 2024, for the last 25 years, we've had a group in the Palisades, an interfaith group, where the leadership of all the mainline religions in the Palisades, we meet together once a month to have lunch, to pray together, and to share our suffering with each other. Whatever we're struggling with, we just get together, and we have an average attendance of about 12, and it's a wonderful experience. And the result of that is we have our interfaith celebration at Thanksgiving, all right, at different churches or gathering places. So it's interesting what you touched on again, very kindly, the Methodist dream, of creating this massive Christian community with their idea of Christianity, all right? And then the reality of being overextended and not able to pay the bills, and eventually people buying their own property and moving on like we were just sharing. So we moved from that very exclusive kind of concept of Christianity to where we are today in 2024 in the Palisades, which is totally inclusive. So we've moved in our journey, and I'm hoping it's in a good direction, right?
I think it is. I remember when they started that getting together. It's extremely important, and I find that religion in this community is extremely positive. I travel a lot, and I've seen in places where it's not so positive. So.
Yes. And then that wonderful picture you had of what you felt was the dedication of the church.
Yes.
The main character in that picture with the big
yes.
Hat,
Yeah.
He is, at that time, he was the auxiliary bishop in Los Angeles. And he went on to become the Archbishop of Los Angeles. And his name was Timothy Manning.
So that was Manning.
That was Manning.
Well, by the way, you're going to get copies of all these images.
Good. And Timothy Manning was born in Cork, Ireland, I want you to know, and in Booganbara. And his father was a blacksmith, and he became a priest, began his studies in Ireland, but he ended his studies for the priesthood in San Francisco. And through him, my connection with him is that I'm a priest here in Los Angeles, linked in with Manning. He was the one that invited me to come to LA. And so here we are. That was 60 years ago. All right. So 60 years ago, he invited me to come to LA, and at that time, I was 19 years old. So can you imagine a 19-year-old guy in Cork, Ireland, being invited, if he wanted to be a priest, if he was serious about being a priest, to consider being a priest in LA? Let me tell you, I was thinking Hollywood, Santa Monica, and so the good Lord led us here, but Manning, your man, was the guy that invited us to.
I knew he was pretty impressive. Good. Yes.
I just have a comment, that is, please make a video of this so it's recorded.
Now, I am only beta testing this. There's a longer presentation that I will make. I'm going to edit after seeing your comments and reaction. But I want you to know we did, Patrick here videotaped me. Yes, over there.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I wanted to stand up for Palisades Lutheran Church. And Holy Cross Lutheran was the original structure on the northwest corner of Sunset and El Medio.
Yes.
And then the structure that you showed briefly was Lutheran Church of the Palisades, which was torn down, and then their congregation merged with Holy Cross and is now Palisades Lutheran Church. So hopefully that'll be part of your presentation.
Addenda. Yes, go ahead.
I'm not taking a minute here. We're all part of the Historical Society, Randy and I, and Patrick over there with the camera. And we're working hard to digitize our archives and save the history the best we can for the modern era. And I brought Randy and I did this 2 years ago for the centennial. And it has a lot of pictures in here that were here tonight on the screen. If anybody would like a copy, I've got some copies. Everybody was we mailed a copy to everybody, but a lot of people didn't get it or whatever. I'm happy to give it out. It says $20, but that was when we were trying to make some money. Realistic, if you want a copy, see me after this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
When we moved here, we got a copy of Where the Mountains Meet the Sea. Is that still in print? Can we still get a copy of it?
No, we're out of print on all of our books, unfortunately. Sorry.
So maybe,
Maybe if we get in a big donation or something. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Randy, there's only one other church that I can think of that you missed.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear.
About it.
Yeah.
The Vedic temple.
Yes.
At the back of the building where.
The most elegant gentleman. He was. Yeah, I'd see him walk with hard shoes and a suit. Yes, and you're correct.
The X-ray man.
X-ray man.
He went to-
Yes.
Is that, there's a building that was behind where Beach Street Restaurant is?
Yes.
Is that where-
That's it. That's the Veda. Yes.
Because it was mystical, it was like just a
Yeah.
mystical sign.
Yeah.
And it was like.
Okay. One more question.
But some years ago, it became more like a yoga studio. Not the Vedic temple we remember at the back of that building that
Yes.
the street is on.
Yes.
It's not, because it was always closed, and it was open 2 hours, I think, on a Sunday. I always thought, I would like to do this, but it's not there as a
No.
Vedic temple anymore.
No. I think during COVID, yeah, I think it disappeared. Any other question? What?
Calvary.
Calvary is actually the Christian church. Remember the one that they just said Christian church? That became Calvary. And I should have made that clear. Yeah. That. Okay. Any others? I'm about. Oh, one more.
Just the address again of that cemetery that you mentioned, right behind somewhere. Where is it? What's the address?
All you do is drive down and you'll see a wall with an adobe wall. You can't miss it. And there's a plaque on the road, and that's where it is. Now, it's closed to the public, but on certain days, they do have special events. And it is extraordinary to see. Okay, yes.
Is that off the 7th coming down?
Yeah, it's off 7th. You have Kingman first, and then you have San Lorenzo. Okay, yes.
Also, they had the school kids go over there.
Yes, yeah, that's Ernie was with school kids. Okay, I'm about to close this down. Thank you very, very much.
That was wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
I think Calvary just celebrated, I think it's 75 years.
Uh-huh.
But we did a whole presentation, all these old photos and everything are now in the sanctuary.